The morning sky was bright blue as Jasmine Wilson held her grandmother's hand tightly. The courthouse looked huge to her 6-year-old eyes, all stone and marble with tall doors that seemed to reach the sky. People rushed past in suits and fancy clothes, their faces serious and their steps quick. "Stay close to me, Jasmine," her grandmother Marion whispered, squeezing the little girl's hand. "And remember what we talked about. You need to be quiet in the courtroom." Jasmine nodded, her beaded braids clicking softly together. She wore her favorite yellow sundress with tiny daisies along the hem, the one her mother had bought her before going to the hospital. She missed her mom terribly, but Grandma Marion had explained that her mother needed special medicine and doctors to help her feel better. The courtroom was nothing like what Jasmine had seen on TV. It was smaller, but still fancy with dark wood everywhere. The wooden benches were hard and uncomfortable. Jasmine swung her legs back and forth, her shiny black shoes barely reaching halfway to the floor. "When will it be our turn?" she whispered to her grandmother. "Soon, baby. We just need to wait for the judge." Jasmine looked around at the other people waiting. Some looked scared, some looked angry, and some just looked tired. A lady in a black suit smiled at her from across the aisle, and Jasmine shyly smiled back. "All rise." A man in uniform suddenly called out, making Jasmine jump. Everyone stood up, so she did too, still holding tight to her grandmother's hand. And that's when she saw him. The judge walked in wearing a long black robe, his face serious as he took his seat at the big desk at the front of the room. Jasmine stared at him, her mouth dropping open in shock. She knew that face. For as long as she could remember, her mother had kept a small photo in her bedside drawer. Sometimes, when Mom thought Jasmine was asleep, she would look at it and cry softly. Once, when her mom was having a good day, Jasmine had asked about the man in the picture. "That's your daddy," her mother had said quietly. "His name is Robert. He was going to be a big shop lawyer. He had to move away before you were born." "Will I ever meet him?" Jasmine had asked. Her mother had just kissed her forehead and whispered, "Maybe someday, baby girl." And now, here he was, older than in the picture, with a little gray in his hair, but Jasmine was sure it was him. Her daddy was the judge. Without thinking, without listening to her grandmother's sudden intake of breath or feeling the tug on her hand, Jasmine pulled away and took 3 steps forward into the center aisle. "You're my dad," she called out, her small finger pointing directly at the judge. Her voice rang out clear and strong in the suddenly silent room. The judge froze, his gavel halfway to the desk. His eyes, wide with shock, fixed on the small girl in the yellow dress. "Jasmine," her grandmother hissed, hurrying to pull her back to their seat. But it was too late. The damage was done. Everyone in the courtroom was staring, heads swiveling between the little girl and the judge like they were watching a tennis match. The judge's face had gone pale. He cleared his throat once, twice, but no words came out. A woman with a stack of folders dropped them, the papers scattering across the floor with a loud flutter, but nobody moved to help. The courtroom stayed frozen in that moment, as if time itself held its breath. "Order," the judge finally managed to say, his voice strangely quiet. "We will take a 15-minute recess." He stood up quickly, his robes swirling around him as he almost ran to the door behind his bench. "Grandma," Jasmine whispered as her grandmother pulled her back into her seat. "That's him. That's my daddy from the picture." Marion Wilson closed her eyes briefly, her hand trembling as she stroked Jasmine's beaded braids. "Oh, child," she whispered, "what have you done?" People around them began to whisper and stare. Jasmine didn't understand why everyone looked so shocked. Shouldn't they be happy she found her dad? Wasn't that a good thing? The lady in the black suit was now walking toward them, her face serious but kind. "Mrs. Wilson," she said quietly, "I'm Mrs. Taylor from Family Services. I think we need to talk." Judge Robert Harrington shut the door to his chambers and leaned against it, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. His hands were shaking as he loosened his tie and sank into his leather chair. That little girl's face, those eyes, had struck him like lightning. "This can't be happening," he whispered to himself, running his hands over his close-cropped hair that was now sprinkled with gray. Just 15 minutes ago, his biggest worry had been clearing today's busy court calendar. Now, his carefully built life seemed to be crumbling around him. He pulled open his desk drawer and took out an old, worn leather wallet. Behind his driver's license, tucked away where no one would casually find it, was a small photo. A young woman with a bright smile and eyes full of dreams looked back at him. Tanya Wilson, his Tanya from all those years ago. Robert closed his eyes, remembering their last night together. It was raining, and they stood under the awning of her apartment building. He told her about the clerkship offer in another state, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that would set him on the path to everything he'd ever wanted. "I can't turn this down," he had told her, water dripping from his coat. "It's my big break." Tanya had smiled through her tears. "I know. You're going to be amazing." She had kissed him one last time and pushed him away gently. "Go change the world, Robert." He had promised to call, to write, to visit, but the demands of the clerkship had been overwhelming. Weeks turned into months, and when he finally had a moment to breathe, he convinced himself it was kinder to let her move on than to offer her the scraps of his time. He never called. And now, a knock on the door made him jump. Judge Harrington. His clerk Lee peeked in. "Are you all right, sir? The courtroom is waiting." Robert straightened his robe and stood up. "I'm recusing myself from the Wilson case. Please inform Judge Parker he'll need to take over. Tell everyone I've become aware of a potential conflict of interest." Lee nodded, though confusion was clear on his face. "Yes, sir. And there's someone from the ethics committee who'd like a word. And Mrs. Reynolds." Robert nodded. "Send her in after court is adjourned for the day." After Lee left, Robert walked to the window. From here, he could see the city skyline. Buildings he'd helped shape through countless legal decisions. 15 years on the bench. Before that, 5 years at the city's top law firm. His journey from the small house he grew up into this position of respect and authority had been long and hard-fought. His mother had cleaned houses to put him through college. He had worked nights at a gas station to pay for law school. Every step of the way, he'd made sacrifices. Some of those sacrifices, like leaving Tanya behind, had hurt, but he'd always told himself they were necessary. Now a little girl in a yellow dress had thrown everything into question. He remembered the child's certainty as she pointed at him. "You're my dad." Not a question, a statement of fact. Her eyes, Tanya's eyes, looking right through him. Robert checked his watch. The courthouse records office would still be open. He could look up the Wilson case file right now, find out the child's birth date, do the math. But deep down he already knew. The night before he left for his clerkship, they had been careless. Too caught up in goodbye to worry about consequences. He had convinced himself later that nothing had come of it. That Tanya would have contacted him if there had been a baby. Unless she couldn't find him. Unless she'd tried and failed. Unless she'd decided he didn't deserve to know. "Judge," Lee called through the door. "The ethics committee representative is here early. She says it's urgent." Robert took a deep breath and adjusted his robe. Whatever was coming, he would face it head-on. That's what his mother had taught him. That's what he would have taught his daughter if he'd known she existed. "Send her in," he called, his voice steadier than he felt. Denise Reynolds tapped her pen against her notepad as she sat across from Marion Wilson in the small conference room at the Family Services Building. Between them, Jasmine colored quietly in a book of animals, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on staying inside the lines of an elephant. "Mrs. Wilson, I appreciate you meeting with me on such short notice," Denise said, her voice gentle but professional. At 45, she'd been a social worker for over 20 years, but cases like this still surprised her. Marion nodded, her eyes never leaving her granddaughter. She was a dignified woman in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and hands that showed years of hard work. "I didn't have much choice, did I? Not after what happened in court." Denise gave a small smile. Children have a way of speaking truth at the most unexpected moments. "Himph." Marion's lips tightened. Jasmine has always had her mother's boldness. Sees something, says something. Denise glanced at the file open before her. "I'd like to talk about Tanya and your daughter. How is she doing?" Marion's shoulders dropped slightly. "The doctors say she's responding well to the new medication. This episode wasn't as bad as the last one. They think she might come home in a month or so." "And has she been able to see Jasmine?" "Twice a week. I take her on Tuesdays after school and Sunday afternoons." Marion reached over to smooth Jasmine's braids. Tanya's a good mother when she's well. Sometimes the darkness comes back. Denise nodded. Bipolar disorder can be managed, but it takes time and support. Support we haven't always had, Marion said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. It's been just us three women against the world for a long time. Denise leaned forward slightly. Which brings me to what Jasmine said in court, about Judge Harrington being her father. At the sound of the judge's name, Jasmine looked up from her coloring. Is my daddy coming to see me today? Not today, sweetie, Denise said gently. Keep coloring your elephant. It's looking wonderful. Satisfied, Jasmine returned to her artwork, pressing down hard with a gray crayon. Marion watched her granddaughter for a moment before speaking. Tanya told me about him when she found out she was pregnant. They met at the library where she worked while going to college. He was a law student, smart, ambitious, handsome. They dated for about 8 months. Did she tell him about the pregnancy? Marion shook her head. She found out a week after he left town for some big job. She tried calling him a few times, but his number had changed. She wrote letters that came back. Then her symptoms started getting worse, and she had other things to worry about. But she kept his picture? Denise asked, remembering what Jasmine had mentioned during their earlier talk. One picture. She told Jasmine about him sometimes. Not much, just that he was studying to be a lawyer and that he had kind eyes. I never thought. Marion's voice trailed off. You never thought they'd cross paths, Denise finished for her. Especially not in a courtroom with him as the judge. How is that even allowed? Shouldn't he have known whose case he was hearing? Denise shook her head. The case was filed under your name as temporary guardian, not Tanya's, and Jasmine has your last name, Wilson. There would have been no reason for him to connect the dots. Marion rubbed her temples. So what happens now? Is he going to just walk into our lives after 6 years of nothing? Does he even want to know her? From across the room came the sound of paper tearing. Jasmine had pressed too hard with her crayon. Oh no, the little girl whispered, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at the rip crossing through her elephant's trunk. It's okay, baby, Marion said automatically, reaching into her purse for tape. Denise watched the interaction, noting how quickly both grandmother and granddaughter moved to fix the problem together. This was a family unit that worked, that had found its balance despite challenges. To answer your question, Mrs. Wilson, Denise said carefully, Judge Harrington has agreed to a DNA test. He's as shocked by this as you are. But if he is Jasmine's father, well, then all of you will have some decisions to make. Marion's eyes returned to Denise, sharp and protective. And what if we don't want him involved? Denise didn't answer immediately. The law had one perspective, but human hearts and lives were always more complicated. Let's take this one step at a time, she finally said. First the test, then we'll talk about what's best for Jasmine. The clock on Judge Harrington's office wall ticked loudly in the silence. Across from him, Denise Reynolds placed a manila folder on his desk and slid it toward him. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blinds, creating stripes across the carpet. Everything I could find about Tanya Wilson and her daughter is in there, Denise said. I thought you might want to review it before we talk. Robert stared at the folder as if it might bite him. His tie felt too tight, though he loosened it an hour ago. Finally, he reached for the folder and opened it. The first page was a birth certificate. Jasmine Tanya Wilson, born 6 years and 4 months ago. He quickly calculated backwards, his heart sinking as the dates confirmed what he already suspected. The time of conception aligned perfectly with his last week with Tanya. She tried to find you, Denise said quietly, watching his face. There are copies of returned letters in there. Phone records showing calls to your old number. Robert flipped through the pages, seeing Tanya's familiar handwriting on envelopes marked "Return to Sender" and "No longer at this address." His stomach knotted with guilt. I changed my number when I moved for the clerkship, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Got a new address, knew everything. I was starting fresh. He continued looking through the documents, finding medical records showing Tanya's first hospitalization during her pregnancy, then more serious episodes after Jasmine was born. School records showing Jasmine as a bright student who loved reading. A crayon drawing of 3 stick figures labeled me, Mommy, and Grandma. She's a remarkable child, Denise offered. Very intelligent, very observant. Her teacher says she reads at a third-grade level already. Robert looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. How did she recognize me? I've never met her. Denise pulled out another document from her own folder. Tanya kept a photo of you. According to Marion, she would sometimes show it to Jasmine and tell her stories about her father, the future lawyer who was going to change the world. Robert's hand trembled slightly as he accepted the photocopy of the picture. It was from their trip to the beach, him much younger, laughing into the camera, his arm around Tanya. He remembered that day perfectly. The way the sand felt between his toes, how Tanya had insisted on burying him up to his neck, both of them laughing until they couldn't breathe. I loved her, he said suddenly, surprising himself with the admission. It wasn't just casual. I really loved her. Then why did you leave? Denise asked, not unkindly. Robert leaned back in his chair, memories washing over him like waves. I had nothing to offer her then. I came from nothing. My mother cleaned houses to put me through school. That clerkship was my ticket out, my chance to become somebody. I told myself I'd go back for her once I was established, but life got in the way? He nodded, shame coloring his features. I met my ex-wife during the clerkship, got caught up in my career, convinced myself Tanya had moved on too. He closed the folder, unable to look at any more evidence of his absence. I've missed everything. Her first steps, first words. All of it. Not everything, Denise said. She's only 6. There's still a lot of life ahead. Robert ran a hand over his face. If I am her father, and let's be honest, the timing makes it pretty clear I am, what happens next? I can't just walk into her life and pretend the last 6 years didn't happen. And what about Tanya and her mother? They've raised Jasmine without any help from me. Denise's expression softened slightly. That's what we need to figure out. The DNA test is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Once we have confirmation, we can start talking about next steps. Does Jasmine know about the test? Her grandmother told her the doctors need to check something in her cheek to see if you're really her dad. She seems excited about it. Robert nodded, trying to imagine this child, his child, waiting to find out if he truly was her father. The thought filled him with equal parts terror and wonder. What if I'm not what she needs? He asked quietly. I don't know the first thing about being a father. Denise stood up, gathering her notes. Nobody does at first, Judge Harrington. Not even those who get the full 9 months to prepare. She paused at the door. But from what I've seen in my years doing this job, the ones who worry about being good enough usually turn out just fine. After she left, Robert sat in the growing darkness, the folder still open on his desk, trying to picture a future he'd never planned for, but suddenly couldn't imagine living without. 2 weeks crawled by like years. Robert checked his phone constantly during court recesses, waiting for the call from the lab. At night, he found himself looking up articles about raising daughters, about blended families, about how to connect with a child you've never known. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Robert was reviewing case notes when his private line rang. The results are in, Denise said without preamble. Can you meet us at my office at 4? His mouth went dry. Is she? Am I? We should discuss the results in person, Denise replied, her tone giving nothing away. The drive to the family services building was a blur. Robert parked his car and sat for a moment, raindrops pattering on the roof. In law school, they taught him to prepare for every possible outcome of a case, but nothing had prepared him for this. Denise was waiting in the lobby. She led him to a small conference room where a sealed envelope sat in the center of the table. Marion Wilson decided not to be here for this part, Denise explained, taking a seat across from him. She said whatever the results, she needed time to process before seeing you. Robert nodded, understanding. His fingers drummed nervously on the table. Would you like to open it? Denise gestured to the envelope. He shook his head. You tell me. Denise picked up the envelope, broke the seal, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the document, and then she looked up. The probability of paternity is 97%, she said quietly. You are Jasmine's biological father. Even though he expected this result, hearing it confirmed hit Robert like a physical blow. He leaned back in his chair, a strange mixture of emotions washing over him, Relief, fear, wonder, regret. "I have a daughter," he whispered, testing the words out loud for the first time. Denise gave him a moment before continuing. "We need to discuss next steps. Legally, you could petition for partial custody or visitation rights. But given the circumstances, Jasmine's established home with her grandmother, her mother's condition, your position." "I don't want to disrupt her life," Robert interrupted. "Or make things harder for Tanya or Mrs. Wilson. They've done an amazing job raising her without any help from me. So what do you want?" The question hung in the air. What did he want? 2 weeks ago, he hadn't known Jasmine existed. Now he couldn't imagine his life without her in it. "I want to know her," he said finally. "I want to be part of her life in whatever way is best for her. I've missed 6 years already. I don't want to miss any more." Denise nodded, making notes. "Marion has agreed to a supervised visit if the test was positive. We can arrange that for this weekend if you're available." "I'll make myself available," Robert said immediately. "There's something else you should know," Denise said, her expression softening. "Jasmine has been asking about you every day. When I spoke with her yesterday, she showed me a drawing she made of what she thinks you look like up close." She pulled a folded paper from her folder and passed it across. Robert opened it carefully. The crayon drawing showed a stick figure man in what was clearly meant to be judge's robes, with a huge smile and oversized glasses. Above it, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "My dad the judge." Something broke open inside Robert's chest. He'd spent 15 years making decisions that changed people's lives, but now, looking at this simple drawing, he felt the weight of the most important decision he would ever make. "What do I say to her?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "How do I explain why I wasn't there?" "The truth," Denise said simply. "As much of it as she can understand at 6. That you didn't know about her, but now that you do, you want to be in her life." Robert carefully refolded the drawing. "And Tanya? Have you told her?" "I visited her yesterday. She's doing better. Might be released next week. She was surprised, but not upset. She said she always knew Jasmine would find you somehow." "Can I see her too?" "Tanya, I mean." Denise considered this. "One step at a time, Judge Harrington. Let's focus on Jasmine first. Building that relationship will be challenging enough." Robert nodded, tucking the drawing into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. "Saturday, then?" "Saturday," Denise confirmed. 10 o'clock. Bring yourself, not presents. She needs to know who you are, not what you can give her." As he drove home through the rain, Robert realized his life had just split into 2 distinct parts, before knowing he was a father and after. The future stretched before him, unknown and frightening, but filled with possibility. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies and a breeze that hinted at the coming fall. Robert stood in front of his closet for nearly 20 minutes, changing his mind repeatedly about what to wear. A suit felt too formal, jeans too casual. He finally settled on khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt, approachable but still respectable. On the drive to the park where they'd agreed to meet, he rehearsed what he might say, but every practice sentence sounded wrong in his head. Too stiff, too apologetic, too desperate. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, his palms were sweating, and he'd given up on finding the perfect words. He spotted them right away. Marion sitting on a bench near the playground, watching Jasmine climb on the monkey bars. The little girl wore bright yellow pants and a t-shirt with a cartoon character he didn't recognize. Her beaded braids bounced as she swung from bar to bar. Robert took a deep breath and walked over, clutching the stuffed elephant he bought despite Denise's advice not to bring gifts. It wasn't expensive, just something soft for Jasmine to hold if she felt nervous. That's what he told himself anyway. Judge Harrington. Marion acknowledged him with a nod, her expression guarded but not hostile. "Please, call me Robert," he said, shifting his weight awkwardly. "Thank you for agreeing to this." Marion studied him for a moment. "She's been talking about nothing else all week, nearly drove me crazy with questions about you." Before Robert could respond, Jasmine spotted him from the top of the slide. Her face lit up with recognition, and she zoomed down, racing toward them with flying braids and pounding feet. She skidded to a stop about 3 feet away, suddenly shy. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. She had his eyes, his smile, even the slight dimple in her right cheek. "Hello, Jasmine," he said, his voice gentler than it had ever been in court. "Are you really my daddy?" she asked, getting right to the point in the direct way children do. Robert knelt down to her level, nodding. "Yes, I am. The doctors did a special test, and it shows that I'm your father." Jasmine tilted her head, examining him carefully. "How come you never came to see me before?" The question he dreaded most, right out of the gate. Robert swallowed hard. "I didn't know about you," he said honestly. "Your mom and I lost touch before she found out she was going to have you. If I had known, I would have been there." Jasmine considered this, her small face serious. "Grandma says sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even when they don't mean to." Robert glanced at Marian, who gave a small shrug. "Your grandma is very wise," he said, turning back to Jasmine. "I made a mistake by not finding your mom again. I'm sorry for that." The little girl nodded, accepting his apology with surprising grace. Then her eyes fell on the elephant tucked under his arm. "Is that for me?" she asked, her reserve melting a bit. Robert smiled, offering her the stuffed animal. "Your grandma told me elephants are your favorite." Jasmine took the elephant, examining it carefully before hugging it tight. "I named all my elephants. This one can be Roger." "Roger the elephant," Robert repeated, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. "That's a good name." "Do you like puzzles?" Jasmine asked suddenly. "I brought my favorite one." She pointed to a backpack sitting beside Marian on the bench. "I love puzzles," Robert said, meaning it. "Maybe we could work on it together." And just like that, they found common ground. Marian spread a blanket on the grass, and Jasmine emptied her backpack, a 100-piece puzzle of the solar system, 3 books, and a container of sliced strawberries that she insisted on sharing. As they fitted puzzle pieces together, Jasmine's initial shyness faded. She told him about her school, her friends, her visits to see her mom, and her dream of becoming an astronaut someday. Robert listened, asking questions, storing away every detail like treasure. When she laughed at his clumsy attempt to name all the planets in order, the sound wrapped around his heart and squeezed. At one point, while Jasmine was focused on finding a particular puzzle piece, Marian leaned over and whispered, "She's giving you a chance. Don't waste it." Robert nodded, watching his daughter's small fingers sorting through the colorful pieces. He wouldn't waste it, not a single moment. "Found it!" Jasmine exclaimed, holding up a piece of Saturn's rings triumphantly. "Good job," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're really good at this." She beamed at him, the sun catching the edges of her braids like a halo. "We make a good team, don't we?" "Yes," he agreed softly. "We really do." 6 months after Jasmine had pointed her small finger at him in that crowded courtroom, Judge Robert Harrington stood in a different courtroom, this time as a father rather than a judge. The hearing room was smaller, with warm wooden panels and comfortable chairs instead of hard benches. Judge Patricia Coleman, a colleague Robert had known for years, sat behind the desk, reviewing the papers before her. Robert straightened his tie and glanced at Marian Wilson beside him. The past months had changed their relationship from wary strangers to something approaching friendship. They had navigated birthdays, school meetings, doctor appointments, and countless handoffs of a little girl who now moved comfortably between 2 homes. "Nervous?" Marian whispered, noticing his fidgeting hands. "A little," he admitted. "Never thought I'd be on this side of a courtroom." Marian gave a small smile. "Never thought I'd be standing next to my granddaughter's father in one either. Life has strange turns." The door opened, and Denise Reynolds walked in with Jasmine and Tanya. Robert's heart leaped at the sight of his daughter in her special court day dress, deep purple with tiny white flowers. She had insisted on wearing it even though he'd explained this wasn't a formal occasion. "I want to look nice for the judge," she had declared that morning while he braided her hair, a skill he'd practiced for weeks until his fingers no longer fumbled with the strands. Tanya looked better than he'd seen her yet, clear-eyed and steady, her medication finally balanced correctly. Their reconnection had been awkward at first, filled with apologies and explanations from both sides. But they had found a way forward, focused on the daughter they shared rather than the past they couldn't change. "All rise," the clerk announced as Judge Coleman prepared to speak. "Today we're here to finalize the shared guardianship agreement for Jasmine Tanya Wilson," Judge Coleman said, her voice warm but official. I've reviewed all the documents and recommendations, and I have to say, this is one of the more positive outcomes I've seen in my courtroom lately. She looked at all the adults in turn. Ms. Wilson, you'll continue your treatment program while sharing parenting responsibilities with your mother, Marion Wilson. Judge Harrington, you'll maintain your current visitation schedule with gradual increases as outlined in the agreement. All major decisions regarding Jasmine's education, health, and welfare will be made jointly by all three of you. Robert nodded, still amazed at how naturally they had fallen into this arrangement. There had been bumps, like the time Jasmine had a meltdown because his apartment didn't have the same bedtime books as Grandma's house, or when he and Marion disagreed about whether Jasmine was old enough for pierced ears. But they had worked through each challenge, putting Jasmine's needs first. Jasmine, Judge Coleman said, looking down at the little girl who sat swinging her legs between her mother and grandmother. Do you understand what's happening today? Jasmine nodded solemnly. You're making it official that we're all a family. Different kinds of family, but still family. A small ripple of laughter went through the room at her perfect summary. Judge Coleman smiled. That's exactly right. And how do you feel about that? Jasmine thought for a moment. Happy. I have my mom and my grandma and my dad now. That's more people to love me. Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. 6 months ago, he hadn't known this child existed. Now he couldn't imagine life without their Saturday breakfast ritual, her endless questions about how things worked, the way she fell asleep against his shoulder during movie nights. Judge Coleman signed the final papers with a flourish. By the power vested in me, I hereby approve and finalize this guardianship agreement. Congratulations to all of you. As they left the courtroom, Jasmine tugged on Robert's hand. Can I ride on your shoulders? Without hesitation, he lifted her up, her small hands resting on his head for balance. She giggled as she rose above the crowd, pointing out things she could see from her new height. Look how tall I am now, she called to Tanya and Marion, who walked beside them. Tallest girl in the courthouse, Tanya agreed, exchanging a look with Robert, one of shared joy, forgiveness, and hope. Outside, the spring sunshine warmed their faces as they walked down the courthouse steps, Jasmine still perched on her father's shoulders, pointing the way forward. Where to now? Robert asked, looking up at his daughter. Ice cream, Jasmine declared, to celebrate our family. As they walked toward the ice cream shop, Robert realized that this unconventional family, created through chance, choice, and a child's unwavering certainty, had become his greatest achievement, far more important than any legal victory or judicial appointment. Sometimes justice worked in mysterious ways, bringing together what had been broken and making it whole again.